Okay, I was just perusing. It looks like most of us are here. Welcome, everybody. I think we'll go ahead and get started this morning. So good morning. Again, it seems like we see each other an awful lot these days. Mike, if you'll go ahead and start the PowerPoint. It's fairly short today. I really want to just ask a couple of questions and get some feedback from the committee today as well. So for those who may be joining us for the first time, Mike, go ahead and go to that first slide. This is how our planning team is structured. And one of the questions that I've had over the last few weeks is, how are we getting broad input, and what does that look like? But when you look at the task force in the middle, this is really your planning team. And that planning team are the people who are the panelists on this meeting today. So we have our health professionals, Dr. Noble and Mary Keller. Dr. Noble is a pediatrician here in town. Dr. Keller is our head of nursing, also served on the state task force, which was very helpful for us, all of our members of cabinet. And on this task force in the middle, we're really hearing from all of these different groups on the outside, which are the focus groups. And they look very departmentalized because they're departments that carry the weight of the work, are the leaders of those departments. What you'll notice today is some of them are in red. The ones that are in red are areas that are really requiring quite a bit of attention. The health advisement that you see on the left is very, very important right now. And it's the advisement on guidance and health monitoring. And just early this morning or late last night, I can't remember, the governor came out and did say that he's holding off on phase 3 reopening in Connecticut. And while it doesn't seem closely linked to school reopening, it is. It is because we are desperately trying to figure out where we are in this phase of COVID. And between now and September, we're going to have a lot of advisement from the health professionals so that we understand, are we in a phase 1 or a phase 2, and how comfortable we are, because it does send a mixed message when the community is hearing one thing and schools are hearing another. And we were on a call yesterday, I was with the commissioner, and we had another call that was a legal related call, just talking about requirements versus guidance. And the health advisement is going to be very, very critical. When you look around the right-hand side and coming through the bottom, the facilities and safety and security, that section really deals with social distancing and all the things that we do to keep us safe within our school environment. And then, of course, the instructional component that you also see across the bottom, special education, our professional learning, curriculum, and instruction. We started our first day of summer school yesterday. And for the most part, it went really well, but it is a very different model than what we used in the spring. And we are really utilizing this time effectively to see how we can enhance our instruction so that if we must be in a hybrid situation or a full remote situation, remote learning next year, we're attacking that kind of challenge a little bit differently. We also have the HR and health, the personnel tracking and staffing considerations. Those are very, very important. And it will have its own complexity. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So we do have 2 surveys that are out right now. The first survey is a family survey. The second one is a staff survey. And the staff survey is divided into certified staff and non-certified staff. And I think this is a really key question. Even though the survey hasn't closed, we've had a lot of people respond already, so we're in a good spot. Means by the end of the week, we're going to have great information. And this question is one that needs a tremendous amount of work on our behalf in how we approach opening in September. If conditions remain the same as they are today, how comfortable will you be teaching? And on the parent survey, it said sending your child to a building. How comfortable will you be teaching in your school building every day this fall with a class that could potentially be more than 20 students with social distancing to the best of our ability? And that pretty much is giving people a realistic picture of if it looks like today. So where would we be? And right now, I just want you to see the responses that have already come in. So we've had 4,530 families respond, and we will push it out again for those families who haven't responded, may not have seen their email. And that's actually a very, very good response considering we sent out just over 7,000. Our certified responses are right at about 733 and non-certified 233. And that, again, those are good responses. Our certified staff is just below 900. So the vast majority of our staff are responding, which is great. So let's take a look at what the family said and just on this one question. So we're looking at how comfortable, if it feels just like today, and we said we're going to try to keep groupings around 20 for the cohort groupings, how comfortable would you be? 31% are very comfortable and 28% are somewhat comfortable. So that's really pretty high, especially considering that it is nervous. You know, when you're talking 59, 60%, that people are feeling quite comfortable, that's a very high result. Not at all is 22%. Now, why that's important to us is that as we're looking at things like scheduling complexity, we are trying to obviously look at cohorts, look at enrollment. So of that 22% of the families that are not feeling comfortable, number one, what can we do to help them get to a better place? What are the things we need to put in place to help them feel more comfortable? And I think the survey is going to give us some indicators with that as well, because at the end of the survey, we ask everybody to contribute 3 things that they believe would help them feel more comfortable about returning. And we're getting some good feedback. But again, it's pretty strong from the family. So when we look at our teacher responses, you'll see only 12% of our teachers feel very comfortable returning, and 22% somewhat comfortable. And it's almost kind of a reverse when you look at not at all, 42%. Now that doesn't mean 42% won't return, because a lot of people have to return because they need their jobs. I mean, that is the reality of it, but it's not an okay spot, to be in for our staff to feel that way and so nervous about returning. So again, we're going to really be listening in our focus groups that we have this week, not only on distance learning, but just what's going to be really important to help them with feeling comfortable, and how can we kind of reverse this where it looks more like our families and more people are starting to feel a little bit more comfortable about being in the teaching environment. And then you look at our non-certified responses. And non-certified actually feel more comfortable than our certified staff. And I think part of that is some of our non-certified staff have actually been out in the trenches. If you're a food service worker, you were serving all summer long, and they still are right now. So if you are a custodian or you're working in maintenance, they have been out in our buildings. They were doing overtime cleaning with PPE equipment. So our non-certified, I'm not surprised, feel a little bit more comfortable. But I think this is a big challenge for us. And I want to pause right there just to get any feedback or questions. And also just to ask Dr. Noble and Mary Keller, could you kind of give us some guidance on where you think we are in a phase 1, phase 2 in COVID, and based on what the governor has stated yesterday and today, are we in the same spot we were a week ago, just being cautious, or how comfortable do we really still feel opening the doors of the schools?
You know what? I would love to be able to comment on that, but I feel like I can't. I think the data is still evolving and changing, and I think it's compounded also by the fact that our testing capabilities are better. So of course we're going to catch more positives. So I sort of look a little bit that we're in a kind of a little bit of a holding period, and I wouldn't say we should, be too quick to react until we have a little bit more information.
So let me ask this: what if it has felt like this for quite a while, and if it still feels like this in September, what is the decision tree that you think the state or some marker that we're going to be able to look to say whether it should be back to school or a hybrid type situation? And I asked that just because a call I was on last Friday, we were going to get more guidance from the State Department of Health, but then there was a statement that we're probably not going to get that decision tree. So it may very well come down to school district working with the local Department of Health and you, Dr. Noble and Mary Keller, in really assessing, okay, are we a phase 1 or a phase 2? So I guess that's where I'm just trying to get an understanding on where is the medical guidance that we actually listen to? Is it the scientific guidance? Is it the doctor guidance? Because I think those two are not matching up right now. like which one is more important than the other? And I don't, and that may be too difficult.
That's such a great question too. And I would love to be able to answer that as well. Remember, I'm a pediatrician. I'm not an epidemiologist. You know, I just want to make it clear what I sort of can and cannot advise on. I will say that I think an important factor that will ultimately be looked at is the burden on our hospitals. That's what's getting various states into trouble, is the point at which they can't manage the volume. And hopefully we won't get back to where we were in April. I don't imagine that we will, but I can't say that for sure. But I would imagine at the juncture that the hospitals are getting overwhelmed, I am sure we will get guidance that is non-negotiable, that we will need to curtail what we're doing in terms of schools.
Yeah, I think as far as the planning, and that's why I really appreciate these meetings, because from the planning perspective, I'm not as worried about where we were last March, because those decisions are the easier ones, because it's so clear that COVID is in a really difficult situation. As much as anything, I look back at last March and April, we couldn't even get PPE equipment any longer for the custodians, for maintenance. So we couldn't have kept our doors open, and we were donating our PPE equipment to, the Greenwich Emergency Medical, to the hospital. That one to me is easier than at what point is it different between, bringing the students back and then all of a sudden trying to reduce the building by 50% perhaps, even at K-5, where it's really difficult to do that. What is that decision marker? And I guess we just have to wait, that's what I'm hearing, that until perhaps they come out with guidance for that.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to have coordinated guidance from the CDC and from, there's a lot of different parties involved. And that's what was very confusing for me as I began in this process. It seems to me that a lot of the decisions are really state governed. And so I think we do our best to take in all the inputs, but acknowledge that, ultimately it seems to me that it's the governor and the local health departments that are going to be telling us what to do. I'm not sure what power of choice we have. I mean, you might be better telling me that.
Well, I look back when we were in March, and the governor had not declared anything, but Greenwich closed, and it came down to our decision locally, because it was right next door, across the New York line, and we felt like we had to do that to keep people safe. And when we pulled just the number of staff that lived in that hot area of New York that actually worked for us, and how many staff members would we have out in our buildings that actually live in those areas. So I guess from that perspective, I was hopeful that maybe there was going to be a decision tree, I think, from the state. Mary Keller, I don't know if you can weigh in on that from the task force at all, but I'm thinking now that may not actually come forward. Are you muted, Mary Keller?
That certainly helps. My sense is that they're going to use the scientific data based on the testing and the rate of positivity, and if it's going up and at what point it's going up. It would be nice if they came out with a number, and they said once the positivity rate is back up to 5%, 10%, 3%, whatever, that we're going to step back and not reopen. I don't know that they're going to do that, but I think if I had to judge where we are right now, I think we're sort of on the cusp of phase 2, leaning towards phase 3. And I think the governor is probably watching what's going on in all of the other states who reopened and how they reopened. And he's going to make a decision, or he's going to look at that before he moves forward, which I think is wise. So again, I think we have to wait and see, like Katie said, wait and see what happens with, the data as it comes in.
Thank you. It just clicked when we were talking about that. The governor is using phase 1, 2, and 3, as in 3 is the best. I just want to point out in our opening checklist, phase 1 is low and phase 3 is the worst. So I'm going to go back in and look at whether that is just the way the plan is written, or if the guidance is conflicting with the way the state is putting out. I just wanted to do that for clarity, because I've talked about phase 1 and I've talked about phase 2. But it is exactly opposite from the way the governor is using it. So I just wanted to point that out. I would also like to just talk a little bit about, if you go to the next slide, and when we're talking about this, we're really talking about these 3 components of our school scheduling. And we're trying to get deep into that, obviously, on the school side. Part of that, again, goes back to the survey that we have out right now. And what are the number of students who may not return? What are the number of teachers? GEA did a one question survey, and their one question survey had about 15% of our staff who would not return due to medical reasons, and need medical challenges. So when you take 15% of your teachers out, is that a medical reason where they still can teach or they can't teach from home? So that's part of the scheduling piece of understanding how many children are in our buildings, how many teachers do we have, and we believe it's going to be very difficult to get substitutes this year, that's not going to be easy. So we're looking at full return hybrid, and just as a reminder, hybrid means that children are in school part of the time and out of school part of the time. And that was another question on the survey. And I can tell you early on, again, it's coming in where being in school for 2 or 3 days one week, and then 2 or 3 days the next week is by far, I think it was around 70% when I looked last, over being in 4 days in 1 week and out the next. And I think part of that is really trying to balance the instructional quality, having more of a set routine for students. But in some regards, I also have families that feel like that's conflicting with CDC or health guidance, because for COVID, they would like you to be in 4 days and then you're out of school basically for the next 6 days. And that is so that if somebody had exposure, that while they're out of school, they would actually have those symptoms before they would return, and it would be less likely to have infection. So it's trying to, again, balance the social emotional learning, keeping kids on a schedule, high instructional quality, and having that routine along with kind of what the health guidance is looking at. And then of course, distance learning, which is full remote. And I might just ask Mark, Mark is new to this. So I believe you're in your second week, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So he is very busy at work, working on the K-5. So I'm going to ask him to speak to some of the work that he's doing.
Thank you, Tony. One of the things that I want to start with is just taking a step back and reminding people at the elementary level that our guidelines for class size is anywhere from 16 to 21 for kindergarten and first grade, up to 24 in second and third, and up to 26 in fourth and fifth grade. So obviously when we're planning for the return in the fall, we've talked a lot about what our cohort size needs to be. And certainly at the elementary level, we're focused at that number currently of 50. And so we're exploring creative options to make sure that we can create cohorts that are 50 or less. And one of the opportunities that we're engaging in right now with building leaders is to assess their overall enrollment in grades 3, 4, and 5, coupled with the number of students who receive services from the advanced learning program, and determining whether or not there's an avenue there worth exploring to reduce our cohort size even more. Again, the bottom line is we want to have continuity of instruction. We want to minimize cross-contamination, for lack of a better term. So the number of adults that students need to see over the course of a day, and really in some instances try to minimize the number of transitions within the building as well. We're also taking into consideration that in the 11 elementary schools, the overall square footage in classrooms vary widely, and in determining classroom setups, whether it be a more traditional setup, meaning classroom desks all facing the same direction, spread apart as appropriate as possible, as far apart as possible, or in looking at over the course of the last few years where some of our classrooms have transitioned to less traditional furniture, determining ways to continue to use that furniture because they have found it advantageous, but doing it in a way that still keeps kids socially distanced as much as possible. So the work of the academic team in coordination with building leadership is to, again, try to reduce cohort sizes as much as possible, be creative in our approach, and explore avenues that we haven't talked about or have finalized fully at this point, but we're working on it.
Any questions for Mark about elementary and where we are right now? No? I'm not muted, right? It's unusual. Just making sure nobody has a question. I'm like, oh, wow, okay. So for middle school, we are, we're looking at it in the same way, except that we were really exploring if it was going to be possible to find a location, which the state encouraged us to do, to look at off-site location for like 6th grade, which would actually relieve some of the pressure inside the building. That's posed to be pretty challenging in this area, to find an area that's big enough to hold all 6th grade, for instance, and looking for that additional space. So we're really still working on better understanding what our class size number is going to be, where are we seeing any spikes in enrollment, and where, as we start to dig into this survey, understanding better also what is the response rate for middle school and parents who maybe looking at remote learning as an option, because even if you're talking about 5%, that's still that makes an impact, whether that's 5% or 10%. Sorry, Karen, I think you had your hand up.
Oh, I'll wait till you're finished.
Yeah, so it's really trying to understand now, what is that percentage of students that may actually come off of the rotation, and what is our team looking like as of today based on enrollment. We get an enrollment update every Monday, and the enrollment updates have been actually fairly steady. There hasn't been a lot of swing, and I know there's a lot of discussion in town about real estate and enrollment. And I think I even said this at the last meeting, we're seeing some spikes in certain grade levels in certain schools, but not overall as a system right now. It's not like our enrollment is above projection, but again, it's still early. You know, we had a realtor reach out, I think even just this morning, wanting to know how soon people have to close on their house in order to be able to get enrolled. And for those people who are watching, you have to be a resident. So that really is, you know, they have to be in their home and have the paperwork in order to enroll. But as of right now, the swings that we're seeing are really more grade level specific. A few schools, especially in kindergarten, which I know we had talked about before. So any questions on kind of elementary or middle, Karen?
Well, you know, I did have 2 questions. I know you guys were discussing looking at a secondary offsite location for 6th grade. I know Mark was mentioning, you know, obviously classroom physical space is different at each of our 11 elementary schools. I know it, you know, reading stuff that's going on around the country, a lot of schools were repurposing art and music classrooms, not just to utilize the space for social distancing, but also to help with transitions in the hallway. I didn't know if that was an approach that we were considering and delivering those in classrooms. At least at the elementary level. And I don't know how that would be handled at the middle school level if we needed to utilize those spaces.
Yes, we are. And we've done the mapping of the buildings where, and elementary is probably because it's the easiest, where we've gone through, we've actually counted up how many rooms are available. But the bottom line is, and that goes back to what we talked about the very first meeting we had, when we first looked at, we actually have the space where we could have been pretty close to 15 with our numbers by recapturing, you know, art and music and all those spaces, but we didn't have the teachers. And that was where the strictest guidance was. And it would have been about 60 more educators. And of course we could have capitalized on, you know, some of our existing staff that may be certified, but it was around 60 teachers. So then we started looking at it from a little bit of a different lens. And that is, how can we spread kids out? So we may have a group of 30 that are in the media center, for instance, in just one cohort of students, just because that's a grade level that ends up being more difficult to find adequate space. The other thing is, when you look at the square footage of all of our classrooms, you know, like we will have a classroom that is 698 square feet in one building, and in another building, you know, it's 900. So every building is different, and we've gone through not only mapping out the rooms, but are there some classrooms that may also need to be moved once we nail this down? Because if we have a 1st grade that has 22 students and there happens to be a kindergarten with 15, and we really need more space for the 22 or 23, they may need to flip rooms depending on the building and the room sizes. And again, especially when you start looking at K1, we have rooms as large as 1,100 square feet. And you're comparing that to, you know, another grade level in the same building that may be 900. So we've looked at square footage and the empty space of the classrooms, and we're looking at that right now and trying to better understand that for middle school, because we're going to have to spread them out. But the other challenge, and this is kind of part of that legal guidance, is, you know, originally the state was looking at, could you have a para with students in a separate classroom, and let's say the teacher's done direct instruction and you're trying to spread your small groups out. Teacher has direct instruction with a small group of 10, and then those 10 students go across the hall. They're in a room with the para working on the independent work while the teacher has the next small group of 10. So you're taking a cohort of 20 and spreading them between 2 classrooms. However, we can't do that, which I think Shemaine spoke to at our last meeting, because our paras can't be in those teaching roles and be alone with children in a classroom and have that expectation on them. So that's another complexity in how we use our staff. So I hope I answered that, Karen.
Yeah, in some way, I know I sent a quick note earlier, but I'm sure you didn't see it. I just, 2 questions, and as we move forward in our discussion today, I know we haven't gotten to the high school yet, but I know one of the concerns that's been shared with me is a lot of parents who've been looking at the survey said it's difficult to answer some of the questions without knowing how distance learning or the hybrid model, the education will be delivered. I know we had a brief discussion about the possibility of streaming if a student was home, or they don't know how the distance learning would be delivered, especially in a hybrid model. So they weren't really sure exactly how to answer it based on scheduling. I know we can't prepare our scheduling until we get the answers to the survey. So I didn't know if are you planning to do a resurvey closer to the school date in case people have changed their minds, and or what are we putting in place for people who opt out and we have that plan and then all of a sudden they decide that they do want to send their kids to school, or the reverse? Yeah. And then I have one more about the educators as well after a question.
Yeah, we will actually survey again because we will have to get final answers from families and commitments on are they bringing their children back or not. And part of the reason this early survey is just, and that's why it was worded the way that it was, if things are as they are today and there's class sizes of 20, do you feel comfortable? Because I don't know that September is going to feel much different than it does now. It may feel just like it does right now. So we asked it that way just to kind of get the pulse. As far as the scheduling, one of the challenges that we're having, and it's not just Greenwich, I'm on the superintendent's meeting every Friday. We chose as a group to meet every Friday because we're all trying to learn from one another, and because we're all in this uncharted territory. We really are being asked to run 2 schools at the same time. One is going to be a distance remote school like we had in the spring. And we've talked about what that's going to look like. It's going to have live teaching. When you think of Google Meets, you think of Zoom, but we'll be using Google Meets because that is our platform. It'll have live teaching. It will have independent work, and you will start and end live every day. It will still be on a school schedule, which we weren't on in the spring. Scheduling will look different. So that really is what we consider remote learning. When you talk about hybrid is where students are, I'm going to give you an example, like for the high school discussion, the A-B schedule. So A and B is basically just taking your high school and splitting your high school 50% so that we know cohorting is almost impossible in a high school environment, but we can social distance and we can do some cohorting, but in order to have the schedules they need, we know it's difficult. So taking the actual enrollment down by half means that we feel like we can get kids safe around the building, have movement around the building, obviously using those markers on the floor, doing everything we can like you do in the grocery store and everywhere else. But when they're home, if you're a B student and it's Monday, then that means you are at home and you are doing your independent work that the teacher has set for you. So when you're face-to-face, you're at home the next day doing the follow-up, much like when you think of a college environment, a teacher is setting those expectations for B-Day. That's really what a hybrid model looks like. Now, if you have a student who is in school and let's say they have an exposure and out at a party or a family event over the weekend, and they are in AP calculus or any class for that matter, and you really want to give them access so they don't miss 14 days if the quarantine is still going to be 14 days of instruction, because they wouldn't be able to be there on A day or B day. Then you're talking about streaming, and really the difference between streaming and what we call live, as far as the technical side, there really isn't any difference, except that the teacher's now in a classroom, and if you set up a laptop or an iPad or whatever you want to utilize, whether it's in the back of the room or the front of the room, We just need to know it's not going to be quality streaming instruction. That's not quality instruction. You know, when you're in a classroom environment, we're going to make sure the sound quality is enhanced, and we're working on that. It's going to be more of a stationary picture of the class. And we don't really know right now how much movement teachers are going to be comfortable with in the classroom. Generally, they move around a lot. It's not like it was when a lot of us were in school. I say us, I'm probably older. But so many of us remember classes where you sat in rows and the teacher never moved. They were up front as the person imparting knowledge, and that's not the way we teach anymore. The teacher really is the facilitator of learning, and so they move around a lot. They're doing individualized instruction with students. Now with social distancing, maybe they won't be as mobile as they would like to be, but the streaming quality is going to be just so a student really can be able to listen to a teacher, hear a teacher, but again, it's not, that piece is not what we would consider really a high quality instructional model. It's doing the best you can with a student who may be quarantined. So I hope I answered that, Karen, on the difference really between when we say hybrid, what it looks like, and remote learning.
Yeah, I just know some parents were, were wondering if depending on the hybrid model in school, some days out of school, how the distance learning at home would happen. I think you've answered it in a small, somewhat way. I know we have more work to do in that area. And I guess when it comes to the educators as well, I know there's a significant portion that have responded thus far that are not as comfortable in returning. I know there's ways that we can look to utilize those educators in a different manner, but I was interested to see, if they put forward any reasoning as to why, other than health, are they concerned about mask usage, about students actually complying and wearing masks or having to wear them themselves, if they were more concerned just about our cleaning protocols or the scheduling. I just didn't know what area, if they addressed what they might be concerned about as to how we can look to support our educators and make their comfort level good to return.
Yeah, I think that's part of the work. Now we know that it's fairly high, where people are a little bit nervous is on those 3 items, what did they list? And one of the big items was having hand sanitizer in their room. And we've already planned to do that. It's not a requirement, but we have planned to do that already. The mask is a big issue. And of course, the state has taken care of that because they've made it a requirement for indoors. And so I think that's going to make staff feel better. I think once we actually put out, here's what a schedule would look like. And I think that's why high school schedule may look different than elementary or middle. Elementary, we're feeling very confident we can get our kids K-5 back without doing some hybrid type schedule, which I think it would be very helpful for families. High school, we're not confident right now. It's so many students in a very tight building. We know that is already running very full. And so we are looking at some sort of hybrid schedule. And I think that's going to be important to get our staff back, because if I'm a teacher and I know what the high school looks like on a daily basis and how crowded, not all of the classes, but some of them have 27 and 28 students in them. And if you know how close quarters they are accustomed to seeing, it's going to make them nervous if we said, oh, everybody's just back in school as normal. And if I'm a teacher, I'm probably not going to feel great about that, where if I hear the district saying, we hear you, to our teachers and our parents, we're really trying to make this work for everybody. I think a teacher's more likely to feel comfortable when they know that we can have some social distancing, that we can have some grouping and movement across the building, as well as having hand sanitizer and mask and all those things that every teacher, I think, really thinks is important. So those 3 items they've listed are very helpful. And I think they're going to be helpful for us to make sure. One of the things that came up quite often in the comments, and I was just in a conversation this morning, is, how we handle the teacher zone. Is it taping off the floor so it's really evident to student and teacher, okay, here's at least a 6-foot zone. So if a teacher is having a class discussion, where is that 6-foot marker so that they know they're kind of in that safe zone? And every classroom's different. Science lab looks different than a regular classroom. Plexiglass, where do we need plexi, where do we not? When I looked at the non-certified comments, it was very evident that to help them feel comfortable coming back, we need plexi at their front desk, because they're the ones where parents come in. They're coming in to pick up a sick child. Highly likely that the parent could be in a home where, you know, something where somebody is sick. So that's something we were just in this morning, that we're going to have to make sure that we work on the plexi at the front desk. Our staff have said we need this to feel safe. So I think this first survey is going to be very helpful. Katie?
Yeah, just a quick question. Do most of the teachers or classrooms have the ability to project the teacher's voice? One of the concerns I have is just the student's ability to properly hear the teacher, particularly with the masks. You lose a lot. I can say that with work all the time. It's challenging. And I think it would help if you could project the teacher's voice.
We're working on that right now. What sort of microphone would that be? That was the discussion I was in just last week with school districts all in this region, and there was only one on the call where they actually already have a mic system in the classroom permanently. That's just something that district has, but we do not. And so we're trying to look at what is a microphone that would help. And not only that, if a student was streaming, even if it's not a great quality, watching off of a, you know, an iPad, just kind of that's stationary, what is the quality of sound that, you know, so you can actually hear understand what the teacher's saying. So we're working on that from a technical standpoint.
We do have buildings that are wired. Glenville is wired, and I think New Leb is wired. I'm not sure if all of Ham Ave is wired. So we do have the capacity to use FM systems in those classrooms. We have some portable units, certainly not enough to do every classroom. But if there are kids for whom they have auditory processing issues or things like that, we have some capacity with portable FM systems in some of the rooms.
Yeah, and that's part of trying to figure out even on if the microphone actually needs to be Bluetooth to the device versus just speakers in the room. And that's part of trialing. What's that? You want to speak to that? Mark wants to speak to that. So let him speak to that. There you go.
So one of the things I wanted to mention was Michael Ting, who's on this call, and he can certainly get more into the complexities of the technical issues, but we are planning two things. One, a stress test, so to speak, of our bandwidth to make sure that if we had to live stream every teacher across the district at the exact same time, could our system endure that level of stress? And the second thing is that we are looking today to go out to different buildings and simulate, you know, or recreate the sounds, the acoustics in the classrooms to determine various types of Bluetooth microphones that might be appropriate for instructional uses. So Mike, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
We have the results of the bandwidth stress test, and they are positive. We have a meeting later on this afternoon to discuss in depth, and I will share the results. With regards to the classroom.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
With regards to the classroom audio systems, we've been looking at several different options. And again, we do have a meeting this afternoon to go over those options and their price points.
Thanks, Mike. So there's a whole team. This is part of the instructional team that is working on some of the resources and tools and that we realize that our teachers have said that need to be better and that we need. And sound quality is one of those that we know we just don't have around the district. So that will be a COVID expense for us in order to prepare instructionally.
Tony, I have a question.
Go, so Mary.
My concern is, and I know we don't want to be sending kids home if they won't wear the mask or don't wear the mask. And I think that's the appropriate position to take. We're not going to exclude kids. But if we don't, then for those parents and staff who have concerns, they have to understand that then for all practical purposes, people are not masked, because there is a good possibility there could be 2, 3, or 4 kids in the room who are not wearing masks. So I don't think we want to get into the position of policing masks. But if we are not going to do that, then we are going to have to be clear that you cannot rely on the fact that every person would be masked.
And it is going to be a little tricky. So from the state perspective, wearing a mask is a requirement indoors. It is absolutely required from a health and safety standpoint. If we have a student who has that medical reason, it's a medical reason, then that will be an exception. However, we do have an obligation for health and safety to make sure that you can't just opt to say, I'm not going to wear a mask. And that's going to be a totally different struggle. And again, that's coming from just the legal call that we were on yesterday, because we're asking questions like that across the state. How do you enforce, wearing a mask? Well, it's the same way you enforce, you can't bring your fishing knife to school. You can't do things that endanger or can put other people at risk. And if that's part of your health and safety requirements, they've set this as a health safety requirement. So if we have it's different. What I'm trying to say is it's different for a family who says, we don't like this, we're not going to do it. And with a family like that, then we will have to have those discussions about, would you like to opt for remote learning? If it's a child who has a unique need and a medical need, and their doctor's telling us this is causing great anxiety, they can't breathe appropriately, that's a totally different situation. And it is going to be complex. And I mean, certainly as a school district, the last thing we want to be doing is fighting with families over wearing masks. And, I really hope that we all know now early that it's a requirement. And I hope that we start practicing with our little ones at home that don't have a medical issue or don't really have a reason. And those parents do want their children back in school to help us comply with the requirements, which we're legally required to do. So again, it is going to be complex. And I hope that it's going to be complex, and I hope that people will help us comply so that we can keep everybody safe and feeling comfortable. And we're going to have to build in mask breaks. I mean, that's something too. There has to be time during the day where, the requirement is indoors, but with little kids, we need some outdoor breaks, and they can take them off when they're outdoors, but socially distanced, doing it smart, doing it with lots of thought. And we have to think about that for middle school and high school, because, I don't know about you, other than those of you in the health profession that are on this, I've never worn a mask for an entire day this whole summer. I've never done that for 6 or 7 hours straight where you don't take it off. When I go out to the grocery store, I struggle going to the grocery store and having to keep it on just through the grocery store or Home Depot. So I know it's going to be difficult for a 10-year-old and a 16-year-old and to wear it all day. And I think reinforcing families to start practicing a little bit. And one of our families that emailed just this week that has a little one that has some real concerns about wearing a mask, they're doing all kinds of things at home trying to practice, just so that maybe they'll be at a point that they'll be able to do it before school starts. But right now, Connecticut is the state that has said it is a requirement for everybody, where some states have actually adjusted for the age of the child and things of that nature. Connecticut has not. Karen, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, so the one thing I knew we talked about this last week was sending out some videos to parents to help them start working with their students. I think, no, let me be clear, I'm sure even our medical professionals will say this, nobody enjoys wearing a mask for a full day. It's not comfortable. It's not the way we're used to flowing through the world. But the sooner we start working to build up tolerance, the easier it becomes. I know it's being done around the world at all age levels, and students aren't able to wear them. It is important to build in the breaks, but I think the sooner we send out stuff to parents to help them start working with their kids to build up some sort of tolerance, the better. Because I think a lot of it is the fear that our children won't be able to do this. And we don't put enough faith in our children's ability to learn and to revise the way that they function with the world. And the more comfortable they are, the more comfortable we will become. The more comfortable we will become, the more comfortable they will become. It's that joyous, circle of life. So I don't know, is there a possibility? I know we talked about this last week. Dr. Noble said she might have some suggestions or send some links. I don't know if there's a possibility that we can start sharing those just to get parents and students prepared. It's also important to figure out what mask works best for each person. I know I've had about 6 or 7. Some are great and some are not. So I've been cycling through figuring what works for me. So I'm sure it's the same with children.
So
Yeah.
I did do some research, and I'm happy to share the links that I've identified. I was surprised to find out that there weren't as many sort of instructional videos like from children's hospitals and such as I would have hoped. There were a number of CDC links. Some were appropriate, some not. So I can certainly forward to you, Tony, and then you can share with the group as you feel appropriate what I've accumulated thus far. And I'm hoping that as time goes on this summer, that maybe some, children's hospitals or or other very reliable, reputable programs will put forth instructional videos for families. I think but it's got to be high quality, and whatever we put forth as a school district, I think we need to be very careful.
Yeah, and I think not only does it have to be high quality, but it has to be short, and it has to be because there's nothing worse than turning on a 5-minute video and you can, after the first minute, you're ready to turn it off. So we're very focused, and Sasha is going to help do that as our communications director. She's actually not with us today. She's on vacation this week and next week. But our goal really is by the end of July to have those kind of the videos pulled together. And not only just the videos on, wearing a mask and hand washing, but just the entries and exits that have to do with the building that are very building specific. Those are going to be very important as well, because we have those mandated trainings now also that we are going to need short videos for, because they're a requirement for us. Any other questions on scheduling, full return, understanding what the hybrid is? And Karen, thank you for that question, because I think we need to better delineate. A lot of people are confusing, I think, streaming and live and hybrid and what that means. So I think we can do a better job of, in the plan, explaining what that looks like. Any other questions? Well, these are our next task force is again on Thursday, and we'll continue to talk more about scheduling. You heard the work that Mark was referencing. Dr. Carabillo, do you have anything on scheduling that you want to add today? Okay, not today. So we'll meet again on Thursday morning, and we have actually our focus groups are meeting. We're meeting tomorrow, so and just looking at where the plan is, and I'll have that again for you on Thursday so that you can see the work that we've added to that. And again, part of it is we're doing meetings every day with between the commissioner, the governor, the attorneys, trying to understand the state guidance and what's a requirement, what's guidance, and how we implement. And that is that's important from a school district liability standpoint, and as well as just making sure we're doing what we need to do, and that we're not doing things we don't need to do, not only from a financially fiscal aspect, but making sure we're focused on the health safety pieces while we're also focused on instruction. Karen?
So I just did, I did have one more question. I think, one of the big key pieces of the state guidance was communicate. So I don't know when we were going to close the surveys for parents and teachers. It might be helpful to send out another reminder, as we sent those out prior to the holiday weekend, even though it didn't always feel like a holiday weekend here. But and I didn't know, I know we're doing some focus groups inputs coming up in the next week or so, which I think will also be, very important to get some more data. But I think if it's possible to hear a little bit more what the high school is thinking. I know at that age level, people seem to think that students can kind of help self-educate at home, but there are the social emotional aspects for that age group that are significantly important to focus on. You don't want to leave a high schooler at home as well for multiple reasons. So I'd love to know, I know that all the high school parents are concerned. It is a third of our district. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, and, see if we can send out some more communication to remind parents to respond to the survey so that we can give them the details that they're looking for. And the other question I know I'd asked earlier, we may not have the answer for now, but it is something I'd love to see if we can get some detail on, is if parents decide that they are going to opt their students out, and then decide after a couple of weeks they want to opt their students back in for in-school learning because they have a better level of comfort. What mechanisms will we put in place for that? Because that will certainly change the number of students in a classroom and so forth. I think it's important for us to know how that will be handled, because it can't assume a parent can't just say, I'm going to send them to school starting tomorrow. It might need some revision. So, if I need to look at that bring it to the board for policy governance to look at, just let me know.
Yeah, so that's one of those areas where we're really working on getting legal guidance, and this is, again, everybody in the state, because if you ask us from a school perspective, we would like to say, if you opt out, you must opt out for a quarter at least, or a semester. By law, we cannot do that. They've told us that school districts will not be able to do that. So the opt-out, we will get a final opt-out as we get closer to school. You know, we know what the schedule is. Here's what it looks like. People will know where we are in COVID. And then literally student by student, parents will have to let us know if they're opting out and they're going to be distance learning or remote learning. And we're going to have to know that soon enough that we can make sure we have teachers who are also remote learning, that we have the staff, because you can't remote learn and do face-to-face at the same time. The other thing is that if a person opts out and they decide that they want to come back to school, we have to let them. So what we do know is we could have, maybe it's a week requirement, maybe it's 2-week requirement, just like when any new student enrolls in the system, we have to get them in a schedule, we have to get their schedule in, make sure all their paperwork's up to date. If a student's been on distance learning and remote learning and a parent decides, I'm ready to go back to school, it may be a week requirement. And again, it's going to take legal guidance. Can you say 2 weeks? But definitely we're going to have some time, because we have to figure out what cohort of children, you know, what grouping do they go into? How many families are choosing to do that? And that's a real concern, because overseas, what they saw was about 20% of the families were opting out. And within 5 to 6 weeks after the school reopened, the vast majority, not quite 100%, but the vast majority had re-entered. So if we did that, let's say you said at the Greenwich High School that, oh, we're just going to open as normal. We're not going to do any sort of hybrid approach because we have X amount of students that have opted out, and 5 weeks later, they're all back. You've changed the actual complexity of what's going on in that building very quickly, and possibly within a week or two, depending on what our requirements are. So that's a real challenge for us that we're having to consider. I'll just mention on the survey, Karen, you won't see any more communication on that, because this survey was sent out a little bit different through Panorama. So what happens is we push it out to about, I think it was just over 7,000 because it's all of our families. But then what happens is only those families who didn't respond get the next reminder. And we did another one on Monday, and then they'll get another one. It closes Friday. So we keep pushing it out, trying to bug those families that haven't seen it, may have been on vacation last week.
Well, that explains why I didn't get a reminder, because
Yeah.
I filled mine out. So thank you for sharing that, because those of us who filled them out probably didn't realize that there were reminders being sent out, because we want to make sure that every parent has the opportunity to respond in case they missed it for some reason. So thank you for letting us know that.
Yeah, and this survey is very detailed in that because it's tied to every school as well, so that, you know, when we talk about feeling comfortable to return, I think I mentioned, but we have 2 buildings right now that are running closer to 30% where they weren't feeling comfortable, you know, as comfortable, where other buildings they were much more comfortable. So we're even trying to look at which school buildings that may have greater challenges, may have more staff that are nervous about returning than another building where it's different just based on who takes the surveys. But it's very detailed in that regard. Well, we are about 5 minutes early today. I'll take any last questions. Anybody? Katie?
Something that is weighing on me a bit. Mary had forwarded a really nice document that is a starting point for looking at how are we going to handle symptoms of illness in children. And I began to edit the document a little bit, and she'd done a wonderful job incorporating CDC guidelines. But I realized as I went through it, this is going to be a legally charged sort of document. And I honestly feel like we need to sort of bump up this sort of a form that is going to be reviewed by parents and have bigger authorities involved. Like, I don't know whether the health department should be providing this. I'm just very concerned if we as Greenwich Public School System put out this document on how to handle, you know, COVID symptoms, of which, by the way, there are so many of them. It's basically the common cold in most kids. So it's going to be nearly impossible to distinguish these symptoms from COVID versus the common cold. So I feel like we're going to need some bigger help, some bigger guns, because if something goes wrong, and this is just a little document that our school system has put out, this is not going to go well.
So what we do is Mary actually is the head of nursing for Greenwich Public Schools. Her supervisor is the Department of Health, Director of Department of Health for Greenwich. So everything we do goes through the Department of Health. And then we get guidance from the state health department as well. So the documents that are pushed out are usually modeled after either one of those agencies or CDC or the health department. And I think what you're talking about is just the health check, which the parent would have at home, and then they check each morning before they come to school. Is that the one you're talking about?
It's more like when you're okay to come back to school and this sort of thing. So it's going to also involve, like, are we going to force students to have a doctor's note every time they have a headache or a sore throat? Are we so I honestly feel like this really should be from the top down.
Well, that goes back to what I was asking for at the very beginning. We were told that the state was going to provide that. What I'm being told now is that they are not willing to go out on that tree limb and provide that for us. So I do think it's going to come down to making sure that if children have been unwell, that they've gone to the doctor, that, we're all following healthy practices. But, if a child has a headache, are we going to be able to say you can't return to school? We're not. And it is going to come down to if they get sent to the nurse doing the assessment and calling the family and working with the family to see, is it a headache because they're, they didn't sleep a lot last night, or is there somebody's unwell? Mary Keller?
Yeah, the document that she's talking about is a document that's that we've been sending out to parents for as long as I've worked there, 20 years. It's a childhood illness, and it basically says, you must be on antibiotics for 24 hours. If you had a strep throat, you can't come with diarrhea or vomiting post 24 hours. And what I to adapt it to COVID symptoms and highlight the COVID symptoms so that people would know that, this is something that they have to pay extra close attention to. And there's certainly a lot of stay home for 3 days, stay home for 10 days, has to be worked out. It's all a draft, but it's not a document. It's not something, it's just addition to a document that we have had and out to as a communication tool every year in the back to school packet.
Well, Mary, you did a beautiful job, creating it and editing it. It's like a whole other level. It's so charged already because there's are you going to test students? Are you going to then require them or give them the option to retest? People can be positive for weeks. So this is like, it has layers of complexity, and I'll be honest, not every physician's office is even seeing sick patients in the office. So there's telemedicine. And so what is going to be, what I would like to suggest is that maybe we incorporate some of the Connecticut AAP, some of the medical advisors that are involved with the state AAP chapter to see whether they have some additional thoughts and kind of group together more input.
I think we should also go back to our swine flu documents, because some of those documents had some of the very specific things you're talking about, which is, how long you're out, what do you do to get back? So it's not exactly the same, but I do think we have some of those forms and information in the old swine flu stuff that we have, Mary.
Yeah, I agree. We can, it's not a finished document yet. That's why it came out in draft form to look at, what are the options with COVID-19. But I feel very strongly, Katie, that our families need communication. They expect communication from us.
Yeah, absolutely.
They always want, they want to know. They're a generally highly educated group of people, and they will ask questions. They want to know from us what we're doing and what we're thinking. And the more information, that we can give them, I think the more comfortable they feel.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. And I'm very committed to working with you on this document, but I'm just thinking who else can we incorporate to make sure, because also the guidance is going to change over time. So this document is likely to need to be modified, which may be unlike, every other year. Even in October, we may have a different set of instructions. And I think we have to leverage the CDC on this very, very heavily.
No, I was going to say, this is Karen Hirsch. We are a district that is guided by policies and procedures, and we do have policies and procedures specifically built in on student health and having students return, like both Marys had said, and there are forms out there that will probably need to be, revised for this. But I will say that I also agree with Mary Keller that the more we communicate and the sooner we start to communicate with parents and set expectations, the better we will be. As we all know, sometimes when student has a sniffle and it's the monthly cold and they send them to school. We don't want students to be sent home just because they have sniffles or allergies. So there, it does need to be, the sooner we educate parents on what we're looking for, even if we let them know that these guidelines may be changing closer to school, and once school begins, the sooner that parents will start to have an understanding and have that comfort level and can send back questions and concerns that will also help guide us as well, I think.
Just keep in mind, when we're talking about sniffles can be COVID in a kid. And this is the whole problem.
That's, no, I understand. That's why I'm saying I agree with you in the regards that the sooner we start to get information out to parents, the better, because we do know that parents will take a look at their child and say, oh, it's just the monthly sniffles, and send them in. That changes now because of the way that COVID is showing up in our younger population. So that's what I'm saying. The sooner we get parents to understand and wrap their brains around that, the better. Giving your student Motrin and sending them off to school isn't going to work this year. Well, it shouldn't work in any year, but oftentimes, that's sometimes what parents tend to do, as you know. But we need to be very cognizant and clear and letting them know that we need to be flexible and things will change. And this is, we have to put the we ahead of the me when it comes to this. We're all in this together, as Troy Bolton from High School Musical said. So, we got to work together as a team.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, we want to be as proactive as possible and get documents ready so that we're not totally reactive. But the reality is, we've never gone through this before, and so part of it is everybody uses the word nimble. I've never heard that word used so much lately, but it's really just being flexible, and we're going to have changes. We're going to have to adapt, and that's, I think, what's really hard. Is school for so many years has been, you start at this time, you end at a certain time, you know what goes on during the day, you know how the cafeteria works. And right now it's a really difficult time, I think, for families, for educators, because everything is going to look a little bit different. And the health related, I think, pieces and the responsibility of the nurses that are in our schools, I think it's going to be really challenging for them. They're in a really difficult situation, and we're going to have parents who aren't going to want to come pick up their children because they're going to say they're fine, because the parents at work and they're just thinking it is a cold. And so we're going to be faced with a lot of that, like wearing the mask, not wearing the mask, but we're going to get through it in the most positive way that we can and make sure everybody's well informed. And so maybe Mary Keller and Katie, the two of you, could look at that form together and see if you want it, and feel free to update and send it to us if there are changes that you guys want to make with that. We are a little bit over today, so we're about 5 minutes longer than normal. So I will see you all on Thursday morning. Thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday.